The more you suffer, the deeper grows your character. And with the deepening of your character, you read more penetratingly into the secrets of life. D.T. Suzuki. I love this quote from Zen master D.T. Suzuki because I credit my many years of intense suffering for the greatest freedoms and joys of my life now. One has to be careful when making a statement like that because it can sound trite and suggest that the suffering was worth the result. From the most expansive perspective, that is true, but to be honest, had I been offered a pill during those years that would have instantly freed me, I would have taken it in a heartbeat. I gladly would have eschewed the suffering, even if I had been told that glorious things would eventually bloom from it. But there was no pill. My only choice was to go through it. As Winston Churchill said, if you're going through hell, keep going. The unfortunate truth seems to be that once we decide to face our pain, the suffering usually gets worse before it gets better. Facing our inner demons is extremely difficult, no bones about it. We shouldn't shame anyone for not wanting to look into themselves. It's a daunting process. I don't know if it's necessary to suffer terribly, but it does seem to provide the necessary incentive to dig deep. I think lightness, love, and joy are a valid path too, but in my experience, most people arrive on the lighter path after a long odyssey in the dark. I think as a general rule, if you avoid the darkness, your light will be less bright. There are exceptions to this, no doubt. Before I found myself on the spiritual path, I didn't have much of a relationship to the word suffering. I understood pain, worry, fear, anxiety, sadness, confusion, lots of different words for various emotional states. But when I was first introduced to suffering as a concept, it was such a perfect word because it seemed to combine all of it. My teacher, Adyashanti, always encouraged us to be precise with our language. It's important to know that we're talking about the same things. And as the path starts to become more subtle, our language needs to become more precise so we can pull apart the intricacies of what we're working with. I mention this because I want you to understand what I mean when I use the word suffering. As I use it, suffering is a creation of the mind. Suffering is essentially the mind resisting what is, thinking life should be different than it is, and that can cover a very wide spectrum, of course. From very small things, I wish my shoes were more comfortable, or I wish this food was a little hotter, to the much larger challenges. I wish my partner was different, or there shouldn't be any war. Life is as it is, and when we impose a story on it of how we think it should be, that tension between reality and our imagined reality is suffering. Resistance to what is plagues most people most of the time, ranging from a heightened state of anxiety to a low-level running dialogue wishing life was some other way, which, of course, is impossible. In real life, there are no hypotheticals. There are no what-ifs, coulds, or shoulds. There's just what is. We tend to become addicted to this idea that life needs to be some other way. There's an addiction to thought in general, of course, and there's this insidious underlying belief that we know how life should be, how other people should be, and that if life would just line up with our ideas, we could then relax. If someday we can fix everything that needs fixing, which is essentially everything, we can then relax and let go. And of course, that never happens. For our purposes, we're going to differentiate suffering from physical pain, although we often say, I'm suffering from a headache or I'm suffering from a certain disease. The suffering aspect, in this case, would be the mind's relationship to that pain. I know the body can have its own very difficult challenges, of course. That's been true most of my life. But in my experience, the suffering arises as stories about that pain. This is certainly not to diminish whatever the actual bodily pain is, but for clarity of these teachings, suffering is in the mind. Here's a story about how my addiction to suffering manifested some years back. One example among thousands, and yet I saw it this one time. It showed me its face, and I saw it. Those moments have the power to shift our understanding and can stay with us our whole lives. I was on a silent retreat in Oregon with my first teacher, Catherine Ingram, sometime in my early 30s. I had been going on retreats with Catherine for some years at that point and knew a handful of regulars. There was one young man that I knew from our very first retreat together some years before. We had developed a friendship over the years and felt a lovely kinship, as those who start a profound journey together often do. I remember it was about 4 days into the week-long retreat, and I was mired in suffering, deeply invested in my old stories. I remember walking to the dining hall for dinner, looking at the ground as I walked the half-mile from my cabin, completely lost in thought. When I arrived at the main lodge, there was a long line waiting for the dining room doors to open. As I walked down the line to get back, I passed my friend. I glanced up and caught his eye, and this big smile came over my face. He smiled back at me, and I felt this surge of boyish giddiness course through me as we connected. And then as I continued past him, I remember very clearly saying to myself, "Wait a minute, you're suffering. Get back to it." And I did. But it didn't go unnoticed. It was such an interesting moment. I had come out of my suffering in a spontaneous, holistic moment when I saw my friend. I felt a complete shift in my attitude, body, and mindset. And I even remember carrying that new lightness for a few steps until the mind came back in and reminded me that I was miserable and that I had to get back to my suffering. It was like a project I was working on that I had to get back to lest I forget. It felt like I didn't deserve the lightheartedness that I had just discovered while connecting with my friend. I was the suffering one after all. That was my identity. But I'd been exposed. How real could this suffering be if I could pop out of it at a moment's notice? But the power of the stories, the momentum of my thought-based history, prevented me from staying in the light for very long. Too many years of habitual stories were more powerful than my clarity at the time. I had real problems to solve, I thought. Apparently, I still wasn't ready to see that maybe I had just been shown the solution. But I did see in that moment that suffering was a choice, and there was an alternative, and it wasn't far away. We have to be mindful of not taking on the identity of the sufferer, which can be a difficult one to shed because we use it as a dysfunctional strategy to find connection. I'm sure everyone can remember at some point sitting with a friend and connecting over the misery of your lives. It's completely understandable. We get hurt, we complain, others give us attention out of concern. It feels good to be cared for, and the feedback loop is born. We can easily slip into the story, if I suffer, I get love. However, we don't want to equate suffering with receiving love. We've all done it, no shame, but it's only an identity like all the others. It's not who we are. The care we get may feel lovely, but we don't feel lovely in ourselves when we're suffering. And isn't that really what we're looking for? We're not looking to be loved for our suffering, we're looking to be free of our suffering, which is the more difficult and committed road. The suffering mind believes the stories it's telling itself wholeheartedly, and so, in a very real sense, it takes a stroke of grace to see the nature of it, to see that it's a story and not the truth. Even if we're lucky enough to have that flash of clarity, the momentum of some of these deeper patterns can set right back in within seconds. They can be incredibly complex, tricky, and seductive, and have an indelible power to them. At least this old feeling of suffering is familiar, we tell ourselves. It may be very uncomfortable, but at least I know it. And breaking free of that identity is unknown. Once again, our commitment to being free is really all we have at the end of the day, and it's no small thing. I would like to suggest that one of the most profound causes of human suffering is our desire, or perhaps even more strongly, our need to understand our lives, or more generally, to understand life with a capital L. It's a beautiful desire and completely understandable. We understand so many things as humans. Our breadth of understanding at this stage in our evolution is remarkable, from the quantum to the cosmic. The things we've accomplished with our minds are hard to wrap our minds around, ironically. There's no wonder we think we should be able to understand our lives, and yet we can't, and that dissonance creates incredible existential suffering. Understanding is an extraordinary human quality, and yet we think we can apply that to life itself. Life is not to be understood. It can't be. It's absurd. We literally create a story about ourselves so that we can pretend we understand our lives. And that story is all we know about ourselves. That's the illusion of it. Instead of knowing our deeper natures, we only know the stories of ourselves. And those stories are ephemeral and untrustworthy and false. We believe that we're someone we're not, and that someone is made of fleeting thoughts. It has no ground to it. This is where the limits of human understanding stop and where letting go comes in. At the deepest level, we stop believing the lie that we can understand our lives, which then allows us to stop trying, or in other words, letting go of the need to understand our lives. And in that, you find yourself at rest as a stillness, an aware stillness that can't be understood at the level of mind, can't be understood by an idea or story, and for that reason is unknowable. This is where profound spiritual experiences are a great gift to us, because with any sort of reflection, we realize two things. One, we didn't create them, and two, we can't understand them the way we understand other things. To share them with others using language feels like an extremely pale resemblance of the actual experience. It starts to become clearer and clearer that who and what we are cannot be understood by the mind, and there begins a letting go into the mystery of life and the discovery that silent presence itself is the understanding.